Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third installment of our Coastal Georgia Tourism Discussion Series. My name is Brian Flick. I'm the Associate Marine Extension Director with the University of Georgia's Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant Program. We're excited to have two dynamic speakers today. Our focus is African American heritage and culture. We have Dr. Dionne Hoskins-Brown, who is with Savannah State and NOAA Fisheries, and she also serves as the chair for the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor. And we also are privileged to have Heather Hodges, who's the executive director of the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor, and both have a tremendous amount of experience working this arena. And we're also lucky to have Dr. Patrick Holliday with Troy University, who's going to be acting as a moderator with the discussion with these two ladies. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them and enjoy.
Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. And once again, welcome to Heather and Dionne. Let's go right into the discussion points. How has COVID-19 influenced travel patterns and local habits within Gullah Geechee and African American tourism? And have you or any of the stakeholders you work with had to make any pivots due to COVID-19?
I can start with that question because I worked closely with Laura Mandala, who many of you know, a national expert on African American heritage tourism, to conceptualize our 2020 Heritage Tourism Market Survey. And it was a project that was conceptualized pre-COVID. So I'll talk about some of my opinions on that question, but it's with the understanding that we didn't go into this research contemplating or thinking about a massive pandemic hitting the country and dramatically affecting travel patterns. What we were really interested in learning more about is who were the people as a general matter that were interested in learning more about Gullah Geechee and heritage tourism and what were their travel patterns. And we were pleased to see that even though we conducted a lot of our research post-COVID, a lot of the trends that the industry saw pre-COVID around the desire of African Americans to travel more, to learn about culture and history, that was still a primary motivator. And when we asked them about their travel patterns, a lot of people reported that they were within driving distance of a lot of the sites that they visited. And that seems to be consistent with what we've seen coming out of other reports across the industry around how travel patterns of Americans have generally changed in response to the pandemic. So we think that the motivation to explore history, African American history and culture, is still there. And that, like many other Americans, that area in which people are traveling is just shrunk a little bit post-COVID. And in terms of pivots, well, a lot of the corridor was locked down. And so immediately things just stopped. We pivoted very quickly to a series of programs we called Virtual Gullah Geechee Corridor, moved a lot of programs online, and that included what turned out to be very popular virtual visits to a lot of our sites. So the historic Harrington School on St. Simon's Island, we did virtual programs with that site. Virtual tours of national park sites. The parks are an important partner for us. So we moved a lot of programs online that still were designed to encourage people to see the corridor as a platform for exploring African American history and culture. And I'll add to that, we could do that because we had the infrastructure in place. We had a robust social media platform. We have an extensive mailing list, and not all of our sites and partners had that. So part of one of the challenges that they faced, or many of the challenges that they faced in pivoting, was moving from sites where people came physically to trying to figure out how they reach those people online and how they deliver some of that visitor experience in a virtual space.
I agree. And one thing I would add to what Heather has said is that, part of the pivot involved using the technology that allowed people to enjoy and appreciate and learn about those sites in a shutdown environment. And so part of what ended up happening was technology transmission from the corridor office. Heather and her team have done an extraordinary job working with technology even prior to the quarantine to reach more people in many different ways. And so it also necessitated kind of teaching and sharing individuals who needed to benefit from the use of technology for those virtual visits in ways that they hadn't used before. And so I think that's been a really important contribution to the infrastructure of communities from the Corrider office.
Oh, Patrick, we think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Zoom world. So, with the recent discussions on diversity, inclusion, and equity, as well as race, how does the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor and Corridor Commission see visitor education, tourism product development, and tourism marketing evolving?
Yeah, that is a broad, a broad question. But I think we can make some broad points around where those aspirations lie. Marketing probably being the lowest hanging fruit. If you all, hopefully you received our 2020 Heritage Tourism Survey, and in it you will find lots of pictures of Gullah Geechee heritage sites and people exploring Gullah Geechee history and culture. So one of the specific points we hope to convey that there is a way to think about visually marketing and conveying the visitor experience in a way that's consistent with communities' cultural heritage tourism goals. The other message that we hope is coming through to people is around entrepreneurialism. We want to encourage more Gullah Geechee community members to professionalize in this field. The report that Laura generated, Laura is, again, a nationally known consultant. Normally access to that data is very hard for community members to find, but we did the report and made it completely free. So all of a sudden community members have access to the same high quality data and information about potential visitors that tourism professionals have. And so we've been very diligent about saying, this is an opportunity to professionalize, to develop a tour, to develop a site using information and data that you might not otherwise have access to. There's some very specific opportunities that are identified in the report that people can, we hope, will grab onto, particularly around the specific types of experiences that people want. Foodways experiences was something that came through loud and clear. And when you look at coastal Georgia in particular, that infrastructure is there. We have Gullah Geechee restaurants, we have Gullah Geechee chefs, we have Gullah Geechee farmers. All of the pieces are there. Now you have information about who the audience is. And now we have an opportunity for Gullah Geechee community members to identify very specific business and entrepreneurial opportunities to capitalize on all of these elements. So we're hoping that is coming through, right? That there are other ways to market coastal Georgia that center Gullah Geechee history and culture in culturally sensitive ways. And there are real opportunities for community members to develop new visitor experiences and to participate in other aspects of the sector armed with this really great information.
Yeah, I think from a governance perspective, the commission sees tourism as having a really important role in continued preservation. And that's part of, what the commissioners are supposed to be focusing on is, not just how to operationalize things that are of benefit to the corridor, but in terms of also looking at preservation and promotion and advocacy. And so one of the things that I think this evolution is going to foster is the business development of community members, but also the Jedi movement kind of begs to everyone that has an opportunity to bring equity into communities, the equity of economic investment. And so economic development authorities, if they're looking at what their role can be in the Jedi movement, it would be equity investment in infrastructure and resources that help support these business developers and entrepreneurs as they grow in this area.
Thank you. What do you see is the role of residents or community members in Gullah Geechee and African American tourism?
I think in this moment, there's two specific roles for community members to play. One is to be very clear about articulating the sorts of resources that they need. The direct investment that Dionne mentioned being one of the most specific resources that is in need. We've seen systematic underinvestment and sometimes disinvestment in African American and Gullah Geechee heritage sites. So one of the ways that, one of the very specific roles that Gullah Geechee community members can play is helping to identify where those needs are. The other thing that they can do is to partner with tourism and local officials to think about what cultural heritage tourism looks like in a specific community. We use the terms Gullah Geechee sometimes as if those are a monolithic group of people. But the Gullah Geechee story of St. Simon's Island is not exactly the same as Charleston, South Carolina. So the way in which community members and tourism officials think about positioning the tourism experience in Charleston is not going to map completely onto coastal Georgia. So in focus groups that were done as part of this study, one of the real concerns was about making sure that there was sufficient recognition of the local Gullah Geechee history and heritage, and not being forced to try and do something that in some ways is performative to make Brunswick's Gullah Geechee culture look like Savannah's or look like Hilton Head Islands, because they're not. And so community members have a very important role to play in helping people to understand what the local Gullah Geechee story is.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, and also want to go back to this idea of individuals as entrepreneurs, because the study showed that individuals who are responding to our study are predominantly dominated by a drive market. And so individuals and communities are in the position to provide services and resources that these visitors want to see. And so I really see that as connecting to this long-term goal as economic development, tourism connecting to economic development, and economic development being community empowerment.
Thank you. Next, what partners are most important to your growth and sustainability with regard to heritage tourism development? And do you have any suggestions on how to best develop these partnerships?
I know that I would like to see more institutionalized partnerships with hospitality and tourism programs. I think there is real need for us to start bringing more Gullah Geechee people through those particular professional pathways. I mean, there's a certain aspect of this work that requires you to have, certain sorts of experiences and credentials, and I don't see that pipeline right now. And so as we start to think about how we build out a infrastructure for sustainably supporting heritage tourism, we have to think about some of where those needed professional experiences will come from. So I'd like to see many more of the hospitality and tourism programs thinking very systematically about how they connect with high schools in the corridor to start trying to interest students in professionalizing in this way, because I think that diversity is important for the industry. But more importantly for these communities, it's going to be helpful for people who grew up in coastal Georgia, who grew up Gullah Geechee, to help inform how the heritage tourism, how that sector starts to grow and what it looks like.
I'm going to keep pointing to chambers of commerce as having opportunities to really contribute. There is a Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, and I think that that's going to play a big role in connecting and developing businesses in the corridor. But chambers have done really important work in terms of building areas. And one example, if you allow me to think like a tourist and a consumer, the Fentress, Tennessee Chamber of Commerce I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, developed the 127 yard sale. And this is what's been seen on HGTV or Learning Channel as the world's longest yard sale, which my family and I have been going to for 10 years. And it was not about a yard sale. Well, it's our mother-daughter trip, and for us, it's about a yard sale. But for that county that was not on a major interstate, their goal was to pull people off of the interstate, get them on state roads, and spend money with local people. And I think that that kind of model where, and that one chamber did it, and then the chambers that abutted it on each side of that 127 highway did it, and now it extends from Gadsden, Alabama to Addison, Michigan. So Georgia has tried to do it with the Peaches to Beaches yard sale, and I've done both. They're not completely comparable, but you know, why could there not be a Gullah Geechee weekend where people can abut all these different communities and eat all of these different foods and buy crafts and visit historic sites? And how would that, you know, support structure? So that was just me thinking really creatively when I was considering this question as a consumer, as a governance person. How, you know, how could you see communities, partners like chambers of commerce investing in a way that could bring in a really big impact?
Thank you. How can we encourage regionalism in tourism development rather than county and city efforts?
So for us, you have to define regionalism and what that region is. I mean, one of the challenges and opportunities we have is that the corridor is 4 states, 30 counties, 12,000 square miles. So how do you begin to conceptualize what a region is for purposes of talking about the culture? Certainly there are tools like trails, which we've talked about and explored, and ways to link people across the corridor. So I think the corridor provides a great opportunity for thinking about what that means and what it would mean for communities, DMOs, jurisdictions to collaborate regionally, particularly around marketing. I think that is one of the most expensive aspects of all of this. And what does a regional marketing campaign look like, and how does it get financed across multiple jurisdictions is something, conversation we would welcome happen, because that is one particular resource and need that a lot of community members identified is more sustained and effective marketing. That said, that has to be balanced again against the concern that came through loud and clear about flattening out local distinctions, right? So you walk a fine line between saying there is this overarching Gullah Geechee culture, but balancing that against, all right, then what does that look like when you come into St. Simon's Island, or you come into Riceboro, Georgia for the Rice Festival? Because we haven't done a good job of conveying that there is a certain amount of regionalism and helping visitors to understand what Gullah Geechee communities look like in different settings, which sometimes will render communities that are very vibrant invisible, because visitors come in looking for Gullah Geechee culture to have certain aspects or look a certain way. And sometimes we'll get calls from, you know, downtown Charleston to our office on Johns Island for people saying, I've been in Charleston for a week and I haven't met any Gullah Geechee people. Where are they? Where do I go to meet them? And we're like, you're in Charleston. Probably your flight attendant was Gullah Geechee. The woman working at the Hertz rental car was Gullah. So along the way, you're meeting all of these Gullah Geechee people. But if you're expecting that culture looks like what you've seen on TV, documentaries about St. Helena Island or documentaries about Sapelo Island, and you expect every encounter with the community to look that way, that's going to be a problem, and there's a mismatch around expectations. So I think regionalism is a great idea, but we also have to figure out how we make space for these very local histories and cultures.
All right, well, thank you. So for our final discussion point, Gullah Geechee heritage tourism interest is growing rapidly. How does the tourism industry navigate concerns about cultural appropriation and cultural commodification?
one, I think it's great that people acknowledge that there are challenges there that they need to be sensitive to. I think from the community's perspective, would like to see two things happen. I think one, to have people better understand that there's a long and somewhat dark history around heritage tourism, and what ultimately was also a lot of cultural voyeurism. You know, as far back as the late 19th century, people were coming into what is now the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor to gawk at Gullah Geechee people, to have them or to ask them to perform the culture in very stereotypical ways. And if you want a good primer on this, the book Making Gullah by Dr. Melissa Cooper, who's a historian at Rutgers University, but also a Gullah Geechee descendant from Sapelo Island, did a lot of this research to look at sort of how cultural voyeurism and tourism, outsiders coming into the community, then taking out very specific ideas about what they think Gullah Geechee culture is based on these limited interactions, have come to, in some ways, both shape and warp Americans' understandings of who Gullah Geechee people are. So her book is a great point of entry to figuring out how we got here, and why community members are very sensitive to these issues. So that's a good place to start. I think going forward, one of the ways to mitigate putting yourself in that position is about sustained conversations and communications with community members about how they want to intersect with the sector. Because they may have stories or parts of the culture that they want to share, but tourism itself may not be the driver, right? So for example, historic preservation may be what they are primarily interested in. They may have an old freedmen's school, they may have an old church that for them is important to preserve as a cultural heritage site that could become a destination on a tour. So it may not be that the tour or tourism dollars is necessarily going to motivate a lot of people to want to engage. It may be historic preservation. It may be cultural documentation and preservation. A good way to start to figure out where those sites are and what they may be is if you go to our management plan, which sits on our website. It contains many important things, but two very important things that I commend to your attention is one, it documents what we call primary interpretive themes. So these reflect extended consultations with Gullah Geechee community members about how the stories they want to tell, what's important for them to share about the history and culture. So read those as a point of entry into thinking about how they would conceptualize an appropriate heritage tourism experience and what they want to get from it in terms of the information that gets shared. The other thing that's back in an appendix, Appendix C, we have a county by county breakdown of important Gullah Geechee historic and cultural sites, right? And so you may be thinking as a tourism official that there are sort of one or two destinations, one or two sites that could be brought into, this heritage tourism infrastructure. But if you look at this broader list of places and sites that community members have identified as being culturally and historic significant, you have a better map of how the community member thinks about the range of possible platforms for sharing experiences, history, and culture. So that plan sits on our website. I encourage you to look at it. And I think that will go a long way towards making sure that when you approach the community members, it's with the understanding of what those stories are or how they want to tell those stories, as well as what that map of places and spaces are that are important to them culturally actually looks like.
One industry that I really wish would look at that table and see that information would be the ghost tourism industry. I mean, that's an example of an industry that's kind of reinventing these negative and kind of not literate stereotypes the impact of enslavement and what that imprint is on places. And they're following a lot of what you saw near the turn of the century around mystifying the African American experience and mystifying the experience of enslavement. And so I really think that that would be a terrific resource for that industry to look at, because it's completely unbridled in how they are treating historical interpretation.
Well, thank you very much, Heather and Dionne. As a reminder, we look forward to the live question and answer session to follow up this panel discussion. That will be on November 20th with our conference attendees. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.